sports are really important vehicles for relationships.
We have purpose. We have a why. We bring people together. We connect.
I feel like God is our greatest supporter and our greatest coach.
Welcome to Rabbi On The Sidelines. This is Rabbi Sherman from Sinai Temple in Los Angeles. This week we are joined by a very timely guest and a very distinguished guest, Seth Davis. The resume is very long, but we're just going to read some of it. CBS Sports studio analyst for March Madness and college basketball, writer for The Athletic, 22 years as a senior writer of Sports Illustrated, author of 5 books, one of them about returning to summer camp, which we might get into a little. Other books are When March Went Mad, New York Times bestseller, Getting to Us, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, and his newest, Wooden, A Coach's Life, and his newest with Sister Jean, who we just had on Rabbi on the Sidelines, Waking Up with Purpose, What I've Learned in My First 100 Years. Seth, it's so great to have you.
Appreciate that. I'll warn you right now, if you're going to ask me about summer camp, make sure that's the last question, because I could do the whole podcast just on summer camp. So get the sports stuff out of the way so we can get to what's important.
No worries. So
thank you for having me. I'm a big fan, and let's give a nod to our mutual friend Ernie Johnson for connecting us. He's a real mitzvah giver. That one. He's a mensch.
Oh man, he is a mitzvah giver, a mensch, and just a connector of people and a connector of souls as well. So yeah, we'll get to summer camp a little later, but actually we got to start with news that's just breaking today with the firing of Doc Rivers, because in this book right here of Getting to Us, you talk about the peak philosophy that we'll talk about, but did he get to us? What is the motivation who Doc Rivers is, who's been so successful, and why does he have to leave Philly right now?
Well, it's kind of interesting because this is shortly after that unbelievable answer that Giannis Antetokounmpo gave.
About failure, yeah.
Failure, and you mentioned about Wooden, John Wooden, who never mentioned the word win to his players. He said, let's play to our potential and let's play the way that we practiced. And, whatever happens, it'll be a success regardless of what the scoreboard says. So, I've often said, Rabbi, I talked to a lot of coaches, probably the biggest category of people, just quantity wise, and both number of people and the amount of time that I spend. I talked to yesterday for 1 hour with Tony Bennett, the coach of Virginia, who's a major man of faith and a wonderful guy and an amazing coach. And I've often said the coaching is a great job, but a lousy profession. I don't use the word lousy, but I'll use it in this context, talking to a rabbi. So look, Doc Rivers has won an NBA championship in Boston. He's been named NBA Coach of the Year in Orlando. I think by any stretch of the definition of a great coach, not a good coach, a great coach, Doc Rivers meets that definition. This is a cold business. And sometimes, sometimes teams just need change for change's sake. Was it his fault that Joel Embiid got hurt during the playoffs? Was it his fault that James Harden didn't play well in Game 7? You can say, well, they blew Game 6 against the Celtics, but why did they even have the Celtics on the verge of elimination in the first place? If things go a little bit of a different way. I mentioned about Virginia, Tony Bennett, they lose in the first round of the NCAA tournament on a last second shot to Furman. Does that mean that their tournament is a failure? So, what I do know about Doc, having gotten to know him and written about him, the theme of his chapter is that there's nobody who responds better to adversity than him. He is able to march forward. And frankly, I often talk to these guys, for lack of a better word, counsel about, you don't always have to move right on to the next thing. Maybe we could do a better job, experiencing the moment that we're in.
Yes.
And that means savoring your wins. Like, he told me a story in the book about winning the title in Boston. And he celebrated on the court, and he did the press afterwards, and he was back in his office. And, later that night, he's in a grocery store buying groceries to bring home, and he still has red on his collar from the Gatorade bath. And it occurred to him that he never went into the locker room to celebrate with his players. It's like, what are you doing, man? You won a title. Like, don't go right on to the next thing. But in this instance, I think that attitude will serve him well. And I'm sad for Doc, but I'm certainly not worried about him.
And it seems like a common refrain in terms of all these coaches, in terms of the adversity that they go through, the excellence that they achieve. But the excellence is often not an end, but in fact, it is a next step to the excellence that we often can achieve, which of course, transferring to the spiritual realm is the same. Like, what is that moment that we're trying to get to, or is it this process that we're actually on that is the most important part of the journey?
And finding your why, finding your purpose, and doing it in the midst of the storm, not just looking back on it. And so, yeah, learning to experience the joys of winning, because how often, Rabbi, do you hear, the old refrain, is that all there is? You win a title and you think that's what's going to make you happy. And you're like, how come I'm not happy? Well, I would say, how come you think you need to win a title to be happy? Like, be happy in the moment, whatever you are. And happiness is a choice. This is all about, what Viktor Frankl, wrote about in Search for Meaning, and all of his lectures in that even in the, if you can find meaning and purpose in even the worst circumstances, like, why can't you find meaning in the best circumstances? And the answer is that your ability to find that meaning and experience that meaning should not depend on your circumstances.
Actually, Elie Wiesel once said also the same prayers that we say every morning in Hebrew, Ashreinu ma tov chalkeinu, how good it is for the portion that we're given. And they said, how could you say that in Auschwitz? And he said, well, if I could say it there, I can say it every single day of my life as well.
That's
and
right.
One of those
reminds me, by the way, of the old Catskills joke about the couple in the restaurant, and the husband says, the food here is so terrible. And the wife says, in such small portions.
Yeah. Now you're a rabbi.
There you go.
One of those people over 47 years who sometimes didn't have a smile on his face is Jim Boeheim, as you can see behind me. I'm a Jim Boeheim disciple, as growing up in Syracuse. And one of those times that you might have chosen against the Orange was in 2013 against Montana. This little clip of what happened with Gomez and Dave on TK99.
I would have to wear some garb and orange.
Nice.
And
nice
given
ball.
what happened today, I will give it a double swoosh.
Now that you wore too.
I did.
Swoosh.
This I brought with me, but this they sent.
You put that on.
Okay.
Double swoosh.
All right.
That made me very happy, but also I think it has a spiritual message of when you do something that maybe doesn't come true, you also have the humility to go back and say, you're right, you know what, I was wrong. So take us through that moment in terms of the faith that you have in making these picks, and also have the ability to say, you know what, I wasn't right, and that's okay as well.
Yeah, well, as I often say when making these picks, there's no slow way to drive off a cliff. So if you're going to do it, own it. I had an even worse egg on my face. I have this, dumb little Sharpie bit that I do on Twitter, which started with a joke with Greg Gumbel keeping track of the brackets and the games on the desk. I would write a Sharpie on my bracket, and it became a game like, how soon can you write the result of the game before the game is over, but you still want to be right, because then your bracket is a mess. And that turned to a Twitter thing. And so the last few years I got into the habit, but the little gimmick, I'll say, of taking a 1 versus 16 game and sharpening the 1 seed right at the tip-off. And I did that right at the start of the Virginia UMBC game. And we all know how that ended for both Virginia and Pitt. So I was eating serious crow. I do remember, first of all, Montana, I didn't realize, I think one of their best players got injured. Not that they would have won the game, but I didn't know until after the show. Someone's like, oh, I didn't know that, because they were a good team. And I got, I think it may have been a text or a voicemail, but it was very soon after the selection show from the man in the picture behind you. And it wasn't Carmelo Anthony. I think he texted me and said Montana ? And if I'm not mistaken, it was like 31-2 at one point, or 29-3 or something. Like, it was an absolute obliteration. And I guess this radio station, I was on some radio station, and they baited me into doing that. But yeah, you know what? One thing I say, Rabbi, is I take my work very seriously. Mm-hmm. I do not take myself seriously. Nice. And you have to laugh at yourself first. You can't take yourself too seriously. Life is way too short to be doing that, especially over some. I remember early, I think it was the very first NCAA tournament that I covered for CBS, and I was at the desk sitting next to Clark Kellogg, who is truly my brother. I mean, I couldn't be closer to him if he were my flesh and blood. And I was up there, I'd made all these predictions, and then I'm kind of like sweating out the results. I'm the rookie on TV. I want to be right. And Clark looked at me all frustrated. He said, "You think you're going to sit up here and not be wrong?" You're right. Being wrong is part of the experience. So let that go, flush that, and enjoy the ridiculousness of what I do for a living. So,
But it's so true in terms of the life lesson is also this idea of peak. Actually, as you saw the email that I sent you this Friday, the inspiration of peak of persistence, empathy, authenticity, and knowledge. That's just not a court lesson, but that's actually a life lesson as well. Take us to Coach Boeheim for a second, because I think this idea of him being the son of a mortician, of a funeral director, and I had him. He was one of my first guests, and he explained that like these difficult relationships that you have early in life really do form how you have relationships later in life. And each one of these people in here, I mean, the Dabo Sweeney thing is fascinating, where his mother is his college roommate, and you have Urban Meyer, who runs home from a baseball game, maybe not because he wanted to, but realizes that he got to us that he eventually wanted to. So all of these unbelievable coaches, they have the Gatorade bath, but there's something deeper inside. And to me, it seems that often it's this leap of faith that they take to get to excellence.
So oftentimes, when I interview people, especially in depth and about all their lives, they'll say to me, "Boy, I feel like I'm in therapy." I say, "You are," because I approach interviews like a therapist. In fact, my lead quote in the Doc Rivers chapter is, "You can get a great speech from a therapist."
Yep.
He's talking to his therapist and he's thinking, "Oh, I can use that talking to my team." You know, that's why these guys are so sick. So, I do think with men, it starts with our fathers. It starts with our relationship with our fathers. In Jim Boeheim's case, his father was not, and this is very often true with men of this generation, Mike Krzyzewski, not emotive people, not huggers, not kissers, not "I love you guys," not expressions of emotion, certainly not showing vulnerabilities. God forbid, heaven forbid, we should show to our sons that we're vulnerable. And I'm so glad that the culture has evolved to a point where that is, you mentioned about Jay's toughness, like that's toughness is showing your vulnerability. So that relationship, and sometimes, like a Barack Obama, his relationship with his father was defined by the absence of his father, the specter of his father. Sometimes Tom Izzo was extremely close to his father. Urban's dad was very domineering, demanding. Jim's dad was not only a mortician, and that he literally, the home where Jim slept, as you well know, was a literal funeral parlor. That's why I started the
thing only lasted a couple nights there.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, imagine like being 9 years old and walking down to school and walking past a room with an open casket and a dead person lying in the casket on your way to grab breakfast, on your way to go to sixth grade. I mean, if that's not a formative experience, there ain't no such thing. But it's only valuable to me as a writer, Rabbi, through the prism of that relationship with his father. And his father was a tough cookie. His father did not show him warmth. He knew that his dad loved him, but certainly he didn't say it. And they had a very combative relationship. And we all carry, if you want, for lack of a better word, baggage residue from those relationships. And you can see it in the way that Jim interacts. But he also had his mom in the picture, and his mom was emotive. One of my favorite stories from that chapter, I've repeated it often, when he goes to Syracuse and Dave Bing is there, and he's like, "Mom," he's like, "This guy's like way better than me. Like, no matter how hard I work, I will never be as good as this guy." And she says, "Well, what about all those other guys?" And he says, "Well, none of those guys are as good as him either." And she goes, "Well, I guess you'll just have to be better than those other guys." So he had his mom in the picture. And then, I do say with Jim and a lot of these folks, hopefully with all of us, John Wooden is a great example. Over time, you never stop learning. You never stop growing. You never stop being vulnerable, being curious. And I do give Jim credit that he has evolved. Believe it or not, he's a lot softer and warmer than he used to be. He's never going to be Mr. Warm and Fuzzy, but being able to chart that progress, frankly, has made me a better writer. But I think, Rabbi, it's made me a better husband. It's made me a better father. It's made me a better brother. It's made me a better son, because when you're interviewing someone, there's no judgment. I just want to learn about them so I can write about them. And when you set aside judgment, it's amazing what people will share with you, and it's amazing what you'll be able to learn.
So I've actually been a recipient of many of those good deeds of Coach Boeheim, even when he was a little more crankier than now. Specifically in the special needs community, that there was never a no. And it's interesting because the face that you see on TV is absolutely not the heart and soul that you see in that community as well. And so, yeah, he's a he's a good one. You did mention Coach K, which of course is Coach Boeheim's really wonderful friend and partner on the USA Olympic team as well. And there's a little clip here that not about Coach K talking about basketball, but you interview him about the loss of his brother. And this interview clip really shows the humanity about who this man is.
It'd be a tough subject. We're coming up on the 3-year anniversary of the day you lost your older brother.
Right.
He was a longtime captain in the Chicago Fire Department.
Right.
You said he was your hero.
Well, there's an emptiness. I told him many times, I said, I don't think I could ever be the brother you are to me.
So that moment of Coach K, and the next line is that you're basically bringing me to tears. Why do you ask him about that moment in that life at that exact time?
You know, one of my interviewing tips for young journalists is, when you're interviewing somebody, apologize for sounding like Oprah and then sound like Oprah. Because not that I'm trying to make people cry, but when people get emotional, and it could be for happiness, it could be sadness, and oftentimes it's both, a surfeit of both. Then you do see their humanity, and I've made Coach K cry many times. He cries easily. It's one of his better qualities. And it's just, it's kind of like when I wrote the John Wooden book. People had come to view John Wooden as this two-dimensional character, never had a bad day, never got criticized, never made a mistake. And so I wanted to write about his flaws in a non-judgmental way. And that doesn't mean it's like this big takedown, but I believe when you see someone's flaws, that makes them more likable. It makes them more relatable. And so, when I talk to someone like Mike Krzyzewski, and I'm so privileged to have that exposure to him and that access to him, why waste it on, tell me about this game? We talk about some of that, but it goes to the sense of who you are, what made you, and where do you pivot to in those moments where you are searching for meaning. What do I do next? How do I respond? This is a tough situation. This is a great situation. He's the one who, I first heard him talk about, you never have to worry about being ruined by failure because far more people have been ruined by success.
Oh, I love that.
So yeah, I like getting to the root of who people are, what makes them tick, who they truly are at their core. I'm not trying to make anybody cry. But sometimes when they get emotional, I try to help them, get out of that because I don't want them to completely fall apart on me. But I do know that when I'm seeing that I've struck gold, that we're talking about something that really matters, and that's ultimately what I aspire to when I'm interviewing somebody.
So this is a very timely interview, and that's why it is live, because I like to see what's happening around the world. You mentioned UCLA. Just like a real quick thought on Bronny and DJ Rodman at USC. We have a split shul, by the way. We're like half Bruins with Coach Wooden and half with Coach Enfield. So
that's LA.
See, I just stick with Syracuse right here. But Bronny and DJ Rodman at USC. What's this year going to look like for us in LA?
See, I can't pivot to the Duke thing because those teams hate Duke more than they hate their rival across town. Syracuse, a little safer out here in LA. And for your listeners, yes. I live in Los Angeles as well. It's interesting. I mean, I wrote about this when USC signed Bronny. The thing about USC is it's very hard to get any traction in this town for anything. LA, forgive me for saying, it's really not a sports town that I would qualify. Anybody living in Boston or Philly or New York, Chicago, St. Louis, I mean, those are sports cities. Part of it is because so many folks like myself and both of us, of course, from somewhere else transplanted to LA. And why wouldn't you want to live here? The weather is beautiful. It's cultural. It's a city. It's vibrant. People are amazing. And there's just so much to do. There's a beach, there's a desert, there's mountains, there's Hollywood, there's Santa Monica, there's museums, there's culture, there's art, there's entertainment. So it's hard to grab attention. It's hard to grab it. It's more of a glamorous kind of a front runners town. You know, the Lakers right now, obviously. I was at the game 4 with the Warriors, one of the best sporting events I've ever been to. The Dodgers have that ability, but everybody else kind of has to, you know, even UCLA has to be a super high level, I think, to gain traction. UCLA fans get mad when I say that, but I'm like, hey, go to a Kentucky game sometime, guys. It doesn't look like this, but that's another example.
Syracuse Colgate's getting 12 or 15,000 people.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, Syracuse again. So, look, I think that Bronny can absolutely help USC win. Bronny is not a surefire pro. He's not a surefire one and done. You know, he's a 6'3" guard. He's a very good athlete. He's not Vince Carter. You know, he's not Jaylen Brown. He's a really good shooter. He can absolutely help USC win. So the challenge there is to manage, you know, the quote unquote circus and all the attention. And Bronny, you know, he's saddled with this great attention because of who his dad is. But the good news for him is who his dad is. And I'm not talking about the basketball player. I was literally just talking to a friend of mine here locally about LeBron, because it's so amazing. I don't know if ever see in our lifetime an athlete come into a league at the age of 18 and still do what he's doing at 38. But the fact that LeBron, you know, grew up without a dad, around the house, single mom, inner city, underserved environment, was on the cover of Sports Illustrated at the age of 16 as a junior in high school. Grant Wall, may his memory be a blessing, my good friend and colleague who we lost during the World Cup, wrote that story. Should have absolutely ruined LeBron. It should have ruined him. And he came into the league with all of this hype and not the type of support structure that you would hope for someone in that situation. And in 20 years of the league, he's never done anything wrong. He's never done anything wrong, Rabbi. All the decision and this and that, like, don't be Meshuggah, right? Look what he's done. Look at the human being that he is. Look at the father that he is. I'm so happy that he's getting this experience of the love. I feel the same way about Tiger Woods, who I covered and frankly could be Meshuggah often on the tour, and see the bond that he's now having with his son. So Bronny, whatever happens at USC is going to be okay. You mentioned DJ Rodman. Interestingly enough, I wrote a story about DJ when he was a junior in high school, because I was Rodman's son, and I sat at a bar in Newport Beach with Dennis for about an hour, talking to him with DJ, and watched DJ play with Dennis and getting to know the kid and his mom. And look, I think DJ is, I don't know that he's an NBA player. I would never rule anything out, but I think he can help USC. So if you're Andy Enfield, you're glad you got a couple of players. You're not so worried about the circus. And for those two, they have, you know, great families. DJ's mom is a wonderful woman, incredibly strong. His sister, by the way, is a world-class soccer player, UCLA, now I think in the professional ranks somewhere. So a lot of good DNA in that family. I'm rooting hard for both of those kids.
And so you mentioned sort of the Meshuggah-ness of coaches, and sometimes people do run into trouble. And one of those guys who unfortunately said some difficult things this week was actually Bob Huggins. You interviewed Bob Huggins a couple years ago on the Seth Davis show, and it was talked about the soft side of Huggins. But when I went through that clip, you said something fascinating that I need to play right here, and then we'll talk about Coach Huggins.
It's such a privilege to be that guy, to be there for that kid. As horrible as that moment is, I mean, I don't want to over-dramatize it, but it's almost like, you know, a priest or a rabbi who can officiate or guide families through difficult times and tragedies, that you get to be the guy, as hard as that is, who's going to go onto the court and cradle that kid's head in your hands, and you get to be that guy. I mean, I think on a certain level, that's an extraordinary honor and privilege.
Well, you know, I mean, you're a lot smarter than I am, because, I mean, those situations, everybody thinks they know what they would say, and it's a lot harder than what everybody thinks it is.
And so these coaches, I mean, to say that as like a rabbi and priest, actually, I wrote my theology paper at the Jewish Theological Seminary about God as a coach, which I'll send you later, because who gets the credit and who gets the blame often. And when you look at that moment of Coach Huggins, all these coaches are really getting through their players in terms of times of adversity, but who's helping coaches when sometimes they also say things that might be a mistake?
Yeah. First of all, really impressed at your level of research and prep. You put a lot of professional to shame. And I appreciate you exhuming all of these clips from the Seth Davis show, because I love doing
Great
that show.
show.
I love doing it. I really love doing it. And it got more eyeballs than I would have expected, frankly, at the time. And by the way, that was the genesis of getting to us, where I wanted to sort of take those interviews and craft that into a book. And the editor who edited that book liked the idea of it. He said, let's make this about coaches, which I thought was brilliant. And then we were off and running. Look, everybody has layers. We all have layers. And we never know what someone is going through. We never know why people act the way they act. I wish, and this is why I love your podcast so much, Rabbi, that I wish there was more giving each other the benefit of the doubt in these situations, and assigning, really extending ourselves to assign people the most charitable of motives. I think there's an expression of, assume ignorance before malevolence, and it's so the opposite of our media culture. I mean, if there's one thing I'd love to change about, I spend way too much time on Twitter. Everything is cutting somebody down. How quickly can you jump on someone to make a mistake? I reached out to you about your interview with Myers Leonard. I was so blown away by that. And as a Jew, I was so proud of what our that revealed about our community and the beauty that came out of that moment, because that is the essence of who we are as Jews. We are a forgiving, grace-giving people. We are told we're the chosen people. We are told that we were led out of the Passover story. We were led out of bondage by a God who chose us to carry his message forward. We should have the highest standards for ourselves for grace and forgiveness. So I try to carry that into all of my relationships. And so I tried to carry it into, I wrote something for The Athletic that was a little bit more analytical and from a reporter's standpoint about what Bob did last week. Bob is a man of a certain age and a certain background who talks a certain way. And that's not to justify it. What he did was horrendous. It's a horrible, horrible word that he said. But I'm trying to extend him the grace of what's in his heart. And I use an interview like that because everybody sees them as this guy who basically, well, he must have no feelings, And so I tried to pick this incredible moment where what happened was he's at the Final Four and his best player blew out his knee in front of the whole world. And it was at the end of the game. The game was, pretty much basically over. They're actually playing Duke the year that Duke won it. And, this kid is thinking about the NBA draft and his future as a professional. And there's Bob Huggins cradling him on the floor like a little baby. We're not used to seeing that at Bob Huggins. So I use that as a moment to give Bob a safe space and permission to open up his heart and show that side of his personality to the public, to my viewers, that they don't often get to see. And so he has been scattering those seeds for a long time. And I believe now it's his turn to take the journey that Myers Leonard and so many others have gone on to really, let's get some beauty out of this ugly moment. Let's get some redemption, some grace out of this horrible mistake that you made, which caused a lot of pain to a lot of people. And don't just go out there checking boxes because that's what the school says you have to do to keep your job and earning a paycheck. Really learn about it. And now use your platform to explain to others why what you did was so awful, why this word is so painful. Yeah, in the context that you use it, you didn't mean anything by it. A lot of people use that word and mean something really bad and mean by it. And there are a lot of people in that community who are struggling. The depression and suicide rates in that community are staggering. And so I hope that Bob uses this moment in that way so something good can come out of it.
Actually, when Myers came here, he walked into the synagogue, and obviously everybody knew who he was. And there were two things happening that day. One, we were doing a partnership with the Muslim school from Pasadena, and there were Jewish and Muslim kids sitting around getting to know each other, some with kippahs and some with burqas. And he just was floored. And then he walked into our chapel, and he saw 3rd and 4th grades praying, and tears came to his eyes. And he told me after, he said, as much as you're trying to help me, what I just saw this morning actually is the healing that's being done to me. And if these moments, you talked about giving people the benefit of the doubt in the rabbinic tradition, dan l'kaf sahut, that you should always give people this benefit of the doubt so that they have the ability to actually do that tshuva and that not necessarily repentance, but that the ability to change. And one last sermon, that word teshuva on Rosh Hashanah, it actually means to be settled, but really means to move to yourself. And so if through these incidents, people have that ability to not just change themselves, but then change others, I think hopefully we're on the right path as well. And one of those people that brought faith right to the forefront of college sports is, of course, this young woman, Sister Jean, who thankfully I had the opportunity to interview right during March Madness when you were on the set with Ernie and everybody else. And this is what she said when you asked her about how she wants to be remembered. I just thought it's a beautiful spiritual.
To win. Oh, sure, I'd like to win. And that's what I do. When people say, Sister Jean, do you pray during a game? And I say, you better believe I do.
Still that third grader at heart, right?
Yeah, oh, sure, yeah. I'm like the butterfly that the outside may change, but the best of me has developed.
I'm a butterfly and the outside has changed, but the best of me has developed. Why did you decide, of all the people, that this amazing woman, Sister Jean, needed a book to herself?
I love her so much. I just talked to her. I called her Sunday with my wife to wish her Happy Mother's Day, Wow, so nice. And, she's still
We're planning the bar mitzvah, right?
Well, I told her at the end of this, we got to give a bat mitzvah, although we have to start working on the sequel for her second 100 years.
Nice.
It's funny. I hear, authors sometimes talk about, well, where do you find your next idea? Boy, it's so hard to find a next idea. I have so many ideas for books, really, really good ideas for great books that I could write, man. I just don't have the bandwidth to do it, And so I guess it starts from my own experiences, Rabbi. I was extremely fortunate until my mid to late 20s. I had all four of my grandparents. Oh, wow. And so used to visit them in Florida, and they would visit me and talk to them all the time. They were mentally sharp and young. I played golf with them. And so, watching Sister Jean go through that story in 2018 with Loyola as they made the Final Four reminded me of my grandmothers and how much I just love them and love to talk to them and ask them questions and get their advice and just be around that font of wisdom, that elderly feminine wisdom. There's no strength, there's no toughness like feminine strength and toughness. So it just occurred to me like, wow, how lucky those kids are to be around her like that. And a 98-year-old woman, and ask her about this and that. And what do you think about this and that? And it just kind of stuck at me. And then, I would see Porter Mosier, their coach, from time to time, and like everyone else, how Sister Jean, and he would tell me about her. And he would just talk about how sharp she is, how active she is. She's at work. Like, it was really extraordinary. And so one day I was at the Peach Jam AAU tournament in Georgia. And so always coming, boy, she's got a great book in her. But again, 100 ideas, but something about it wouldn't let me go. And I saw a tweet that Loyola put out about her. I guess her birthday's in August, so maybe my timing is off. Something about, hey, happy 100th birthday to Sister Jean, or 101st birthday to Sister Jean. It's like, man, I bet she's got a great book in her. So I'm talking to Porter. Porter had just taken the Oklahoma job. Left Loyola to take the Oklahoma job. And we're sitting there watching, we're just kibitzing, and like, how's Sister Jean? What's she up to? And he's talking to me about her. She's at work every day. He said, when I got to Oklahoma, I got a big package from her. And it was a book of all the emails that she had sent me printed out. And she sent it to me. And I was like, dude, I got to talk to this woman. Like, can you tell her that I want to write a book? And so I don't know, Rabbi, honestly, if she really knew who I was. Also, as I make a cameo in the book that I make a couple of cameos in the book that I don't identify myself by name, but I was with Greg Gumbel at the Final Four that year. Greg's from Chicago, and his older sister Rhonda had gone to what was then Mundelein College, the women's college, and student of Sister Jean's. And he goes up to her and he says, and it's like loud in the arena, and we say hello to her to take selfies, and he says to her, "My sister, you taught my sister at Mundelein 30 years ago." And she shouts back, "I know. Every time I see you on TV, I think of her." And he went like, "You couldn't believe it. She's 98." So Porter called her for me, gave me a phone number. I called her. I was in Las Vegas for something or other. And we had this conversation. And she said, "Yeah, it sounds good." And I said, "Well, okay, so we need to talk and have some time." And there was a pause. And she said, "Well, why don't you just write the book?" And I said, "Well, A little more to it. I need more to it from you than that, but all you have to do is talk. Let's just talk, and I'll do the hard part. I'll do like you've done the hard part. You're 101 years old and you've lived this great life. So I'll do the easy part. I'll write it based on our conversation. I said, listen, first we have to do a proposal. And then I have no idea if someone's going to want to publish this, if they're going to pay us, how it's going to do. You never know. So as often happens, once we started talking, she really enjoyed it because it got her mind space talking about her family and her upbringing and all her teachers. I mean, we don't really get a chance. Listen, we all love talking about ourselves. I'm loving talking about myself right now. So she enjoyed the process. My agent, David Black, said, I actually have an idea for an editor on this. I said, well, why don't you call him now and see what he says? And this is total Beshert because this guy that he had in mind, his daughter went to Loyola. He went to the games leading up to the Final Four. And he was one of the people who went up to Sister Jean and said, I'd love to do a book with you. And she said, I cannot do a book. I am way too busy. And like a Schmendrick, he gave up and I didn't. So I'm glad he did because that led her to me. So it was an incredible, joyful process. And as I wrote it in my piece for The Athletic about this, I think we wrote a really good book. It's been 4 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. I mean, you could knock me over with a feather. Who knew that? But best of all, Rabbi, is I made a wonderful friend. And we talk and we email, and she is just a true gift from God, a true gift.
Well, she told me the day after UConn won the championship this year, I got perfect timing on this podcast. She said, that man, when he does something and he wants to do something, he's going to do it. So there was no backing down for Sister
Inspired
Jean.
me.
But so in that Final Four, by the way, you had her, Sister Jean, and the utmost, front-facing faith person. And on the other side, you have Villanova, Father Hagen, who I also had on the show, who for 17 years, Associate Athletic Director of Villanova. So these are major faith representatives now literally sitting on benches. What is it about these chaplains, or what do these coaches, do these players, do they need this aspects of faith? Are they seeking it out, or do they realize, as Father Hagen said, that when I actually talk to them, they understand that they are living a life of faith, just might be couched in some different language?
So my sense is that, it's like people, when you talk about faith, sometimes people think religion, right? That gets there's spirituality, there's faith, there's religion. I happen to be a big fan, by the way, of Joel Osteen, and he talked about faith and religion. And I actually met Joel. I connected Sister Jean with Joel, and I got
that's amazing.
I got to thank him for his message, and I met him in Houston. He's a mensch.
We've had him here as well. He's special.
Oh, you had him
he did a conversation with Rabbi Wolpe. Yeah, during COVID.
Oh, fantastic. He's a sports fan. But so my sense is this, that these people live in constant judgment. Right. First of all, the scoreboard is the ultimate arbiter, right? You either won or you lost. You either had more points, and that's the beauty of it. That's the great thing about sports. It's right there. And so then there's fans, and there's the media, and then today's generation of athlete, deals with social media, and you can say, well, ignore it, stay off of it, but you can't tell a 19-year-old. They've come of age in this. This is how they interact with the world, and it can be very taxing. To have somebody in your inner circle who's around every day, so there's persistent. We go back to the peak profile, right? There's the persistence. You're going to be at every practice or the team meals, at every game. You're there, and someone who's just completely non-judgmental. Who's just going to love you and be there to be your spiritual, to make you feel better, regardless of what happened that day, regardless of how well you played, how many points you scored, whether you got hurt, whether you won or lost, how many minutes you got, just to give you spiritual support. There's a lot of value in that. This is not going to sound like a compliment to some, but to me, it's the ultimate compliment, because I'm looking out my office window and my dog is sitting there, right? My golden doodle got Clarence and Sadie. Clarence named for the angel in It's a Wonderful Life. Dogs are spiritual because you walk through that door, man, they have no idea how famous you are or not, how much money you make, whatever. They just want to love you. And so I would hope, that you as a faith leader, you try to say that same thing, that like, I'm not here to judge. So people think of religion as condemnation. And there's too much condemning in the world. So yeah, whether it's a faith leader, whether it's, a lot of times it's a coach's wife. Mickey Krzyzewski is a great example of that, being that paternal presence. I have told so many coaches, you have got to hire a woman to be your assistant coach. I'm not talking about like a sort of operations, and I'm talking about someone on the road recruiting, who's in your locker room, in your practices, coaching up your guys. Why they haven't done that is completely beyond me. It's just a limited, because it's a failure of imagination. Look, women are smarter than men. Women are tougher than men. But also, like, if you're a great offensive coach and you don't know much about defense, when you hire somebody, you're going to want to hire a good defensive coach. So you want to hire someone who has a different set of life experiences than you. So it
reminds me of your Geno chapter right there with his
there
assistant.
You go.
Yeah.
Coaching women. Yeah. So, so I think what those kids are responding to, it's not about, is it religion? And am I get me into heaven if I die? It's just about someone who's there, who just wants to be your friend regardless of how you do. Those people are few and far between, and when we find them, we need to keep them and we need to uplift them.
So the last story that I want to ask you about is Eric LeGrand, moving away from the basketball, but more to the football, but really more to a life story. Injured in a accident on the football field at Rutgers, becomes a quadriplegic, and his outlook on life is so unbelievable. And this is what he said after the 5 years.
Last month marked the 5-year anniversary of the hit where you got paralyzed. Does that seem surreal to you?
It does. It's 5 years since the injury. It's the way I look at it. I try to look at it as all the things that I've accomplished over the 5 year mark. I don't look at it as, wow, like 5 years since the injury. Even though, that does creep up in your mind, makes me think, where would I have been? This could have been my 4th season in the NFL. I've been able to support my family like that.
5 years after, and he can say, let me think about all the blessings that I've done and not the things that I didn't. That is not easy to think about. And at the same time, earlier in that interview, he talks about another friend who's a quadriplegic. An elevator doesn't work in the building and can't even get it in. Who is this hero, Eric LeGrand, and what can we learn from his story in terms of not, like you said, the simple moment of faith, but peak perseverance, persistence in our life, and authenticity?
Yes, and I know, Rabbi, this is very, very personal for you because of your brother being a quadriplegic, and so, these events are horrible. Yeah, it's a horrible thing that happened to him, and yet all he talks about is how lucky he is, partly to have the financial wherewithal, him as an athlete, and in a very high profile way. So, he has a university to support him, a community to support him, and so. They completely, like that house that I was in, they completely redid that house to give him an elevator and all the contraptions. His mom at the time, and I take still is, his primary caretaker and helping him out. You probably didn't get a chance to see it, but I sent you a link to an article predating that interview that you just showed.
I just read that. Yep.
For SI.com, where my son.
Yep.
And so I'm trying to remember how it was certainly still in elementary school, because when we moved to LA, they were young. And he had to do some school paper on some figure in New Jersey. And I just gotten connected to Eric through my agent, Sandy Montag, who's a true mensch. And when Eric got injured, reached out to Rutgers, said, hey, I'm happy to help. Eric wanted to get into broadcasting, so he formed that relationship. And I got to know Eric a little bit through that, doing some things. And I wanted my sons to meet Eric. My life and my work is a flimsy excuse to teach the things that we're talking about.
Love that.
To my sons. My sons will ask me, Seth, why do you listen to Joel Osteen so much? Right? We're Jewish. He's not, obviously. And I say, it's just someone saying nice things to me.
You can tell him the rabbi also does that on Sunday mornings.
Oh, you do? Okay. Okay. So that's like,
when that podcast comes in, we get it.
Yeah. I listen to him when I work out, and you as well. So that's what Eric does for me. And I wanted, I want them always to be grateful, be humble. And, as horrific as that accident was, as much as I could wish we could go back and and so I could brace his fall so he didn't get hit like that, and be able to walk and run and do all the things that he wanted to do. I think it was Albert Einstein said that, coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous, right? So we would like to believe in those awful moments that there is a greater plan, that we're taught that God paints on a canvas that too big for us to really see, but can you trust that? Going back to our conversation about Bob Huggins, like, okay, we can't unring this bell. We can't undo this accident, but what can we do now? And no one I've ever met embodies that better than Eric LeGrand, and the life that he lives and the opportunity that he has to inspire others. It's just wonderful. And I thank you for bringing him up and talking about your brother the way that you do, bringing on someone like Ernie to talk about his son, what he went through with Michael. This is life, man. And we see people in the public eye too often as two-dimensional characters. And we never really know what they're going through. We never really know what's going on behind the scenes. We never really know we don't know anything about anything. And so one of the great things about being a journalist is, I'll leave you with this, and that I know you feel the same way doing this podcast, is I'll say to people, you ever go to a restaurant or you're out somewhere and you see someone who's like famous and successful and you really admire, and you have so many things you want to ask that person, and you say, well, I do that, but I don't want to be that guy. Well, I get to be that guy. And you, Rabbi, you get to be that guy on this podcast. You get someone you can sit down and say, okay, I got some questions for you, bro. Let's talk about something that really matters. And it's the best part about what I do, getting to meet people like you and Eric and all the people that you've highlighted. And God willing, I'll be able to do it for a little while longer.
Seth Davis, CBS studio analyst, 5 books, New York Times bestseller. You've mentioned this word a lot, mensch, but really it's you who are the mensch. And I know you're local, so we hopefully welcome you to Sinai Temple as well. And just
we will do that, I promise.
The humanity that you bring to these conversations is something that we often don't see on TV. And so it's a beautiful moment to sit down with you as well. Wishing you a wonderful day, wonderful week, and good to see you. Rabbi on the Sidelines, Seth Davis. Have a wonderful day.